Today we're talking about connecting knowledge organization structures and learning. And I introduced myself as a member of the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning team, and I've also taught in educational development, educational technology research and development courses, and in the College of Health and Human Sciences and research courses. And to build community and learn about each other's expertise, if you all would please share a brief introduction, that would be great. Okay, who wants to go ahead?
Okay, I can go.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay. Yes, I am Ismail Montana. I am department. I am from the history department. In terms of my role in my department, I'm a full professor, assistant department chair. I yeah, so kind of engage with different kind of tasks
Yes.
that imply that knowledge organization. Which brings me to why I register for this course. I think my own kind of personal research, personal life, I think we are just at a point where, especially with this digitization, etc., so many things are just ubiquitous everywhere. And I've been grappling with the need to be more organized. I When I saw this, I don't know exactly. I don't have the full scope of what this webinar or meeting or session is going to be about, but that is what drove me. That need to be more organized. That is my primary reason for enrolling in this session. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. And thank you for sharing that, Ishmael. And what our focus today will be how we as experts organize our information, and how when we're teaching students who are they could be brand new to a discipline or at various different levels of knowledge along that continuum of knowledge and skills, and how experts and novices organize their knowledge in different ways, and then how we can um, use that knowledge and insight of how knowledge is structured in our brains to improve the teaching and learning processes. I think that some of the structures may provide some insights in terms of how you organize things. Um, so, we can talk about that, but the focus is really on how we as experts can effectively teach and support and take the students along that path of gaining that knowledge and expertise as they become more knowledgeable and move up to that expert level. But as we know, that takes years, decades. Okay, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how these different models maybe provide you some insights on that. Thank you, Ishmael.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Masuma, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is Muscle Master. I'm from Department of English, and my current role is I'm working as an graduate teaching assistant, and it's been like also like from my country. I'm also like a state professor in my country. I have worked for 5 years there, and so like I registered there because the topic seems very interesting because it's called bridging the gap between expert and novices. So I'm here like I was considering myself also as a novice because I want to learn from you. And the thing is that like mastering knowledge organization, it also like uh when I first saw this topic, it was also I was thinking about metacognition. I didn't know that if you are familiar with this topic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a, like a similar kind of thing, which is like thinking about thinking, which is happening in our brain. So
Yes.
it was a little bit like related with that topic. So I was like thinking, oh, maybe something is like related with that. And in my personal life, I'm also like not that much, but I always like to be organized. But I want to learn more about how we can learn more about knowledge organization. That's why I registered there because I always I try to attend if I have like time. I try to attend most of like title training because I like it. I want to like enrich myself. That's why. So hopefully I'm getting because you both are very experienced person in today's station. So I want to learn more from you. That's it. And very nice to meet you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Suma. And it's very nice to meet you and Ismail as well. And so this is really a rich foundation for a discussion because you can share and we've all been students, we've all been you know, teaching experts. And so it'll be interesting to see how we can connect and share insights and bridge those gaps. And we can think about the different processes that we've gone through to develop our knowledge organization, the way that we organize it. And first, we're going to talk about what knowledge organization is, and then different models, strategies that research shows the way that people organize that knowledge. And then as we are experts, how can we, how do we organize our knowledge? And then how do we relate to novices who are early in learning about these complex disciplines and topics that we understand? And what techniques can we use to build that gap and improve our teaching and learning? And so I think it'll also share some insights for ways that we organize other aspects of our lives. And on a foundational level, knowledge organization is how we take the pieces of information. We take in information, and Ishmael was talking about that. It's information everywhere. It comes in so many ways to us. And so how do we take in all that information and arrange it and connect it in our minds? Because if we don't have ways to connect it and make meaning of that, all of this information, then it's just noise. So we're going to look at some research-based models that show how people organize their knowledge. So these first strategies they show models for how people organize their knowledge. And when we look at number one, you can see that each dot represents a piece of information, and it's simply connected to two more dots. There's a simple connection there. And then, so they're first learning, and they build a little bit upon that and connect to the next piece of information you talk about in that chapter or in that experiment or in that English process. And then another way that you can organize knowledge is in a sequential manner. And so that's, first this, then this, then this. And so the person understands that knowledge and remembers it in a linear way. And then if you look at number three, that's a hierarchical structure. So in um, when I look at something like that, I see an organization chart jumps out really quickly. It looks like that. But the hierarchical model also applies to other aspects of various disciplines. And then the fourth model is the web. And when Ishmael was talking about the information, it kind of reminded me of this web. You know, there's information everywhere, but to make sense out of that and make meaning and be able to retrieve it, we have to do something with all of that information so that we can use it and build upon it, share it with other people. So those are the basic ways that knowledge is organized. And we're going to look at how experts organize their knowledge. So we've been in disciplines for decades. And so we take in all this information and we have a knowledge base that we've been building our whole lives, personal lives and professional lives, educational lives, all of that. And we take in that information and then as an expert, so consider you're both experts. When there's all this information, what does that web mean to you? How do you see that web representing your knowledge?
Okay, how does this web kind of represent my knowledge or my experience of the knowledge that I deal with? Well, one level would be the complexity, interwovenness of whatever information or data point that they kind of they encapsulate, but they are not displayed here in any hierarchical linear manner. So I would say, in some ways, this for me as a historian, I would say this is like the crude kind of data. When I go to archives or when I, research and collect all this data, I have it. I have this here. I have that here. I have that here. So that's the way I'm seeing it.
Okay, thank you. And see the one distinction between this web and the web we're talking about is number 4, and then number 1 is a foundational web. And so we'll get into each one of these in more as we discuss more. But when we're learning information, we'll have a piece of information. And then, like you said, with the historian, you have these data points, events that happened in history, people who were impactful, the impact of all of these situations that have occurred. So as a novice, I might know that there was a war in a certain year, and then I might know that there was a military leader or a political leader involved with that. But that's kind of I'm at the very early stages of learning that. So that would be represented in number 1. But then in number 4, as a person who has taken in a lot more information and intentionally, like we are always trying to construct meaning of this information. So we take the example in number 1 and we build upon it. So number 4 looks like chaos. It doesn't have any titles or anything that would explain what that is. So it looks like chaos, but it's intended to represent um, those connections. So if we were in number one, just learning, so I learned about this war and I knew there was a political leader and a military leader. So that's one of those three dot connections. And then I learned something else about one of the countries in the war. And so I start looking at, okay, who's the ruling party, what's happening there. And then as throughout building the knowledge, I start to make more complex connections. And I think about, oh, how did this war impact this country? Who were the leaders? Who was negatively impacted? Who got power? All these types of things. And it starts to build in this complicated um, knowledge organization way in number four that is we have understandings of each one of these aspects of our knowledge that we're building. We also have an understanding of, okay, this connects with the politics of the situation. Maybe this connects with the economics. Maybe this connects with the country and those types of things. So it builds, so we take in our information and we sort it and make lots of connections. Maybe I make a connection between, oh, the economics were this, and so that had an impact on this particular group of people or this country. And so it would probably, well, it would be more effective if they had labels on these types of things, but it's meant to represent that it kind of grows as we continue to take in information. So the web would represent like the highest level of expert because they're taking in the information and they're categorizing it. Because if we take something as new information and we connect it to something that we know, then we're going to more likely remember that than if there's just all this information floating around and you don't have anything to connect it to, which happens to a novice. So that's the way they're explaining number four. And then number three, so number four is an expert way. And then number three is also a hierarchical model. Now, does hierarchical, that also represents a way that more expert people organize their knowledge because they have an understanding of where these pieces of knowledge fit together, but it's in a specific hierarchical way. So when we talk about hierarchical models, I mentioned like a web, I'm sorry, an organization chart. That seems like a clear connection with one of those. But is there any kind of a way that in your disciplines that a hierarchical model, like an organization chart, might um, apply to something in your discipline?
Mhm. Yeah, Masuma, if you
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Both of you join in.
yeah, could you repeat the question again?
So number three is a model of it's hierarchical, and so an example of this when I think of a model like number three, I think of for instance, in one of my science classes when I was in undergrad, we were supposed to learn um, kingdom, phylum, class, display chess, origin, family, species. Okay, so we were supposed to learn those different categories of living things. And so when I look at that model number three, I think, okay, so um, the kingdom of like the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So then there's all these categories underneath it. So I could see that as a hierarchical model, like an organization chart type of thing that kind of continues to grow,
Yeah.
in that model, like number three. So does that look like it might fit with a way that it could represent information in like history or in English?
Okay, and now I get it because I was also not
Okay,
I was not finding what should I say. Sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, like, for if I consider my assignments, which kind of things I have done for my students, I think like whenever I let them to do the research paper, I like in that hierarchical module, I can like put a research paper at the very top of that. Then because I also teach them how to write a paper, how to outline a paper. There are so many stages of to learn how to write a paper. Since I've taught um, introduction to, I taught them how to write research paper at the very beginning level, how to write bibliography, how to write introduction, how to outline papers. So can I say that like research paper at the very top of that hierarchical position, then like bibliography, then introduction, bibliography, and like research method, uh, then the result. Can I say in that way in the hierarchical model? I'm not
I
sure.
I think that is a great example because you would continue to break down. You have the research paper as the big project,
Yeah,
and then within that, the different components of
yeah.
the paper, and
And stages, different stages are there.
yes,
Beginning and the end. They have to like produce a like paper presentation, like showcase presentation. Then they have to write a paper. Yeah, I got it now. Yeah, thank you.
yes, no, that's terrific, and then sometimes people take in information in different ways, and sometimes we explain things and then provide a model, some kind of a sample or template or something. And um, a template of the research, how you're going to have them go through that process could be helpful if they're new to research and trying to figure out, oh, I don't understand. We're talking about, the um, how to research and where do we get the information and these library things, and we're talking about APA and LMA and all these kinds of things. So it might seem like an overwhelming mass of information, but if you put it into a model with that
Mm.
hierarchy, it might simplify it a little bit so they could understand.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And for history, I kind of see also how this could be applied to what we call the historiography, in
okay.
that there is a subject matter, let's say, happen in history, and then you will have individual historians write about that event and offer their opinions and interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
That takes us to the linear kind of level. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third level, then you begin to look at the connection between their argument. Who is arguing what and who is arguing against what?
Mm-hmm.
And then you see the interconnection. And once you
Mm-hmm.
get to that interconnection, then it becomes very, very complex.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's where I like when you kind of explain the graph number 4, and it reminds me, like, when I deal with students, and even sometimes when I listen to experts, they would
Mm-hmm.
use this phrase, can you unpack
Mm-hmm.
this argument or this point? And now I could see how that kind of relates to this number four, level four, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
have that complex, interwoven information or argument that come together, and it's
Mm-hmm.
only the expert, right, who
Mm-hmm.
has the sense of how these came together in the first place and then have to unpack it
Yeah.
intelligibly to non-expert. So I see this kind of relate to like how historians kind of deal with question of historiography. You have
Mm-hmm.
the subject matter, you have individual, you can have the provider context, but then you have individual historians, one after the other, offering interpretations. And then the third level is when you bring their interpretations in relation to one another, who is against what, who is against, against or
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, then you get a complex picture that as an expert. And I think so that's the other way that I see this, in addition to what Masuma kind of outlined. I think we can also, for history, I see this applying as a model or providing a model for us to kind of intelligibly handle how we deal with historiographical analysis.
Mm-hmm. Those are both excellent examples of a way that you could apply that. And then the students, if they can see it in a model that is, it's complex, but it looks simple. And so then they can see, oh, that part of, we're looking at the arguments of these different historians, but it's a way that they can make meaning of it, of very complex information, and and maybe wrestle with it and keep going back. Well, why is it at the third level, not the second? So yeah, that's terrific. You both, those are great examples. Great examples. And so then, as we've been talking about that web, that's the highest expert, and our web just keeps getting more complex. Um, Complex connections, and they can change. Interrelationships, cross references, um, and what is I don't know if they still say that saying where if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. Is there still something like that, Ishmael? I don't know.
Oh yes, yeah. This is a universal adage, right? It's yeah.
Okay, so so in helping the students um, understand this complex information, then um, it really helps a lot for them to understand maybe what's happening in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so the web is flexible. When you get to that level, we can really adapt. And so new information comes in, we say, oh, you know what, this was really like what happened in when I taught research class um, 2 years ago. I had the students had this challenge, so I'm going to adapt it. Or, oh, this historical event is very similar to what happened in 2001, but there's one distinct difference. So then I go to this other part of the web. And so we're very flexible and we can really um, bounce off ideas and new information and make sense of it. Um, so that expert web, it's highly connected and we can adapt it. So if some new information comes in, our whole understanding of this discipline doesn't fall apart. We just fit it into something else. But if we have a hierarchical um, model that we only understand that way, then new information, it might um, sort of break part of that chain. But this web is very flexible. Um, so wait, let me see something here. Okay, so for experts, it's efficient and effective for us to store and retrieve information in a web type of way, because we've been building this foundational information of the discipline for years. So we can just connect it to something we know. We chunk information. And Ishmael, you were talking about new information and how do you organize things in these different roles that you have. And one of the things that we do is chunk the information. So we say, okay, you know what? I'm getting some information about uh, data-driven decisions or something, or I'm getting some information about um, a historical event that happened. So we sort of have these more larger pots of knowledge in our brains, and we take in this new information and connect it with that to this kind of chunk because and I remember when I was doing my dissertation uh, back when one of my professors said you need to find these sort of bigger categories, and then when information comes in you can say, oh, you know what, that relates to the educational technology research challenges of your work, or that relates to the sociological issues. So somehow we got to have a way to take in massive amounts of information, then sort of say, okay, that fits with my understanding of this larger chunk of knowledge, and then you stick it in there and connect it with other parts of that knowledge. So experts tend to chunk information within that structure, and we don't rely on memorization. So it's quicker for us to recall things because we have a deeper understanding, and we didn't just memorize it to, repeat the same information that was memorized exactly. So that web and experts are more adaptable. And you'll see how this can be a challenge for students as we continue to talk, because their novice models are not as adaptable. So we have to bridge that gap. So this photo shows, I work a lot with a piano professor, and they talk about, that first piano lesson. Think about when you first learned what you're teaching, what you're an expert in. When you're teaching research, when you're teaching a certain part of history, and what that was like, just getting that foundation. And there's a lot of information that you need to build upon. So you get those foundational key elements. And then as you're an expert, you get to the Philharmonic and you bring in all these different pieces. And it's an incredibly lovely, well-aligned Philharmonic performance. But we have to go through the stages to do that. Okay, so we talked about that hierarchical model where it connects information in linear ways and levels, and then we understand how those different pieces fit together. It has some categories. It shows equivalent levels of a hierarchy. So if you have equivalent levels of a research paper, maybe you're chunking it into the different components of the research paper, or maybe you have different major categories that you grade that are going to be on the same level. So that's why we would use that hierarchical model, but it fits it into an understandable way for the students. And your examples were great. And so if you think about the impact of, so we talked about the web, it's adaptable, it's flexible. And then we move to, this is also expert, what are the differences with this hierarchical model than the web? You have to have those different, like a main category, and then subordinate categories, and then more detailed subcategories, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So this wouldn't work if you didn't have information that you could categorize that way. Or it would break down if you had some information that didn't fit in a model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe one of the differences between this and the other one, I'm just thinking of structure. And again, the whole thing also explains it, the point one, structure and hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, to hold things together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. And I think that example you were talking about, Ishmael, with the historians and the different arguments, and
Ex-
then that's a,
exactly.
yeah, that's a really good way to
Yeah,
use
and
this
I think
model.
that's kind of represented in the second examples, like school of thought in a discipline.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the different historian viewpoint, interpretation, and how that kind of uh, you know connect to the organized knowledge. And I like one of the previous point that you mentioned because it really just clicked me. I mean, and especially for me, some of the things that I deal with in this mass information age. You can
Mm-hmm.
be talking about something, and someone can quickly go to the internet and come up with information.
Mm-hmm.
If one is not grounded with this structure and hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
then you will tend to be disoriented. But the point that you mentioned, I wrote it down, say not limited by breaks in chain. Because
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, going straight to the internet and getting information and bringing that to our attention,
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't, if it is not grounded on this hierarchy and structure,
Mm-hmm.
that there is something in
Mm-hmm.
there. And that's one of the things that I really kind of, so I wrote it down. I think it's really, really crucial that
Mm-hmm.
we are grounded, self-grounded, and have this confidence of what we are doing to be able to overcome these kind of instances.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a really good point. Yes, because we are bombarded with information in so many ways. Um,
Yeah, that also remind me. Thank you, Ishmael, for bringing this on YouTube because uh, since we are kind of exposed to like the students, but because of now like AI and all the support, all those internet things,
mm-hmm.
most of the time they just if they heard something, they just go for the internet and like bring all the things happening from that. But like
Mm-hmm.
with because of that like knowledge structure, because of that hierarchical like lack of understanding those hierarchical things, they didn't most of the time students didn't like go for it. So yeah, now I'm going to like tell them more about these things. Like you should go for it this way to revisit their knowledge uh to get up or go up or coming up with some knowledge is not the only thing. They have to like ground it. They have to retake and they have to like put it in hierarchical way so that they can find something which is crucial, which is important.
Mm-hmm. Where does that knowledge fit into the larger structure of
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's exactly correct. And you can use it. We're going to talk about some techniques later, but if you're I mean, you could ask them, okay, so they got this information and maybe they grabbed it off the internet, but then have them ask them some prompting questions to have them dig deeper. Like you were talking about metacognition, we're talking about critical thinking, dig deeper and say, okay, well, they grabbed whatever piece of information. Okay, now explain it in terms of how does that compare and contrast to the other historians, such as this one and this one. And why do you whatever those um, substantive comments you would um, substantive factors that you would use to determine if they really understand the concepts and how it all fits into this hierarchy, then it takes it away from just grabbing something from the internet and slapping it in whatever assignment or um, text or whatever to, okay, so you have this, now put it in the context of this greater um, organization structure here and compare it to two other historians or to the war of whatever. Or so then they can't just grab that off the internet. They have to critically think it, analyze it, and apply it to the requirements that you're having them use to show that they have the knowledge and understanding of whatever you're teaching that week or in that course. Or does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So this represents, okay, so the hierarchy, you have developed knowledge, you're sharing it in lots of different ways, and you've built from, what we just had, a handshake, and now we've taken it to a more of a complicated, adaptable type of engagement with colleagues or students, or so they're going to have different perspectives in that the round table on the left, and so they'll have to have a deeper understanding of the people, the socioeconomic impact, different things. Then when they're first meeting, there's that first connection. And then they move up to expert. So we are the experts. We're students. We're still students, lifelong learning. We have to really think about how we can help students and build our classes so that we can help them get that foundational level of knowledge, but then continue to build up to more complex levels of knowledge and skills. And so we talked about the number one, simple connections. And then number two is linear things. If I've memorized information in the way that number two is, then for me to be able to retrieve it and give it back to you, I have to go through that whole linear hierarchy, because that's the only way I memorize the information. And I will give you an example of that. Way back when I was an undergraduate, I was in a lecture hall, and we were supposed to memorize kingdom, phylum, class, whatever those different categories are. And I couldn't remember them, and the test was in like 5 minutes. And one of my friends said, "Oh, my sister is a in medical school, and she knows all these mnemonic techniques for remembering tons of information." She goes, "Here's one for that. Kingdom Kings play chess on frosty green seas." It's completely nonsensical, but it represents kingdom, phylum, class, like class on origin, family, species. But the only way to this day, the only way I can remember that is if I go through the whole order. So that's why we need to take them past that, because if there's a break in the chain, they have to go back to the beginning and do it again. Now, I didn't get more into that discipline, but so I'm sure that would have gotten more complex, but you could see why, if that's the only way they memorized it, it's slower retrieval. They don't have extensive, complicated knowledge about it, and it's not really adaptable. And so there's not connections with other pieces of information, and it's sequential. I mean, there are definitely reasons why you could memorize something in that way, but then we want to build upon it. And so we need to recognize that if we have a student, like, so let's say I'm your student and I understand Kingdom Phylum class, kings play chess on frosty green seas. So how are we going to help that student move to more complex connections um, than just that linear sequential model. We're going to have to build in ways like questioning and applications to get them to understand more deeply. But when we're teaching, and if we're teaching from a web approach in our mind, we need to really think about, okay, these are novices and they don't have all these connections. How am I going to make it make sense so it's meaningful for a person who understands this complex sequential way? Because when those chains are broken, then I have to go back to the beginning of that nonsensical phrase. But I never forgot it. It's really interesting. Okay, so we talked about the slow retrieval on that. So students might memorize information in a timeline. And then Ishmael, like you were talking about, compare maybe a different timeline, compare two different timelines maybe. But that's taking it to a more complex level. Do you all have any examples, like for history, Ishmael, with the students memorizing things in a timeline, but then not really getting past into that deeper level of understanding?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. All right.
Yeah, I think another example would be I like this question of challenges emerge when a link is broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is where the difference between just trying to master individual argument
Mm-hmm.
over given topic, right? But then to be an expert, then you have to be able to establish connection between these viewpoints.
Yes.
If that connection is not established, then we call that a broken chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a
Mm-hmm.
link chain, meaning someone is well grounded and know how argument. I mean, this person is making an argument not from isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, an argument before that person must have prompted that research to be developed and come up in the first place. So if you are not an expert, you will not understand how it relates to
Mm-hmm.
the argument before that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the moving from the linear to the
Mm-hmm.
complex level is understanding how series of argument, series of viewpoint kind of interconnect and interrelate.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Awesome. Thank you. And so then the example of the professors doing complex research in the field and students starting with their fundamentals in lab type experiments. So we're continuing to work through those, how to bridge those gaps.
Mm.
Okay. So one of the things with novices is that, so if you have, we have series of lectures, whether they're online, recorded, face-to-face, hybrid, whatever. Students, if they just take information from each class session and don't connect these things together, then that's not building the more complex relationships. And we can help them to build those by the teaching techniques that we use and the questions that we ask. Ask them about differences. Um, like Ishmael, you were talking about the impact of the prior era in history on why did this thing happen in this subsequent decade. ask those types of questions to draw out, have
Mm-hmm.
them think about, okay, I see this connection, but wow, I didn't even realize, like you said, didn't realize that the era before had such an impact. Um, so those probing questions, the way that we ask students to share that knowledge, the way that we evaluate their complexity and level of understanding, um, all builds those complexities. And so we need to make sure we're paying attention to that when we're teaching. And so when they're a novice, it's slow retrieval of information, but other things that happen is they don't notice contradictions. They don't know, like to you, it might be obvious. Well, that argument that the student made, it doesn't really make sense because of the prior era in history. But if they don't know that prior era in history, then they're not going to notice that contradiction, or they're not going to, or they have these individual pieces of information that don't bridge across anywhere else. We want to help them make those connections. And so some of the ways that we can um, build this is we want to try to build that learning community, and we want to take them from the foundational to the understand the more complex. And when you're selecting textbooks or resources, you can look at how they're organized or how you use them, and how you can use them to scaffold students from those simple connections to those more advanced connections. And I have this ultimate guide picture on here because if that's organized in, maybe it's organized in a hierarchical way, or even a web way, but the index is very clear, then students are going to be able to use that. And you can ask them probing questions and ask them to compare and contrast, or give examples from prior eras or other things, but it'll support building their knowledge. So if I have a little more knowledge than the person next to me, I can still use that ultimate guide because it has detailed information, but it has also foundational information, and it's organized in an important way. And think about how useful the way a tool, a resource that each of us uses, if it's organized well, we can say, okay, I'm really interested in this particular area of research. I'm really interested in that period of history and the different people involved. And so if your resources and teaching are organized in a way that they can really go back and understand it and then build those connections, it'll help. But sometimes we get so, we're so knowledgeable, we can just talk about all these things, but we forget that students aren't there yet. They're in college to learn from us and with us and together with their colleagues. So we want to use techniques to facilitate and build their knowledge. And one of the things you can do is use self-assessments, because you need to know where the students are so that you can connect with them and their levels of knowledge. And I will send you all the PowerPoint slides after this is over. So um, you can see that self-assessments, maybe they do one on Blackboard, or they do a quick one and email it, or it's Blackboard is a really great way to organize the information. So I always recommend completing these assignments, assessments, activities in Blackboard if it's appropriate, because it's a way to organize information. If they email stuff to you, then it's kind of all over the place, and it's much harder for you to keep track of. But self-assessment is really important. And you could say, okay, this class of students has X level of knowledge. We have somebody who's really experienced, and we have some brand new to it. So what techniques are you going to use to help them learn and help them develop those models. And you can even tell them, say, okay, you know what? We're talking about this part of research. And last week we talked about developing a research problem. And so now we're talking about um, literature reviews, and tell them how these connect. How does the research problem connect with the literature review? How can the research problems emerge from a literature review? But if you build in those connections and demonstrate them for the novices, it'll help them. They'll remember better and they'll be able to build upon that knowledge and show their knowledge when they're being assessed in the various ways. So there's a couple of different self-assessments in here. And chunking, we talked about chunking information. Um, we talked about sequential, different ways. You can talk about common misconceptions. Do common misconceptions come up in your conversations with in your discipline, Ishmael?
Oh yeah. I have two courses. I actually have a lecture that I used to start with. This one is pre-colonial African history, and one
Mm-hmm.
is modern African history.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a topic. So, for instance, like when it comes to pre-colonial Africa, it's a non-Western course. So, what
Mm-hmm.
are the student conceptions of the African continent?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a place where, if you look at the Hollywood, for instance, movies and depicting of certain places, right?
Mm-hmm.
So public imagery are always informed by what we derive from our popular culture, right? But is that, you know, true
Mm-hmm.
about these places? So I always start and I engage students in that, and also there are kind of readings that go along with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's terrific because, like you said, popular culture, the information that they're getting. Um, so you're asking them to critically think about, analyze it in the context of the what really, the historical events and all of the facts and things. So yeah, that's great, and you have to address that because you know that it's they're most of them are seeing this, and so it impacts the way they have this preconceived notion. And when we are understanding information, we the first thing we try to do is to connect it with something that we know. So if
Hmm.
they have a misconception about it, they're connecting it to something that's wrong. So that's good that you're, yeah. And they engage when you show those little snippets from movies and stuff, and then have a critical conversation about it. They really engage because, um, it's a little bit of pop culture, and then they kind of go, oh, well, I didn't really know that part about
Hmm.
African history.
Yeah.
And then they remember that. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And so you could have them, if you're trying to gain an understanding of how students, what their knowledge is, um, you could ask them to do some kind of a concept map.
Oh yeah.
Um, so it's just a different way for them to present their knowledge, but it helps them engage. I mean, they can draw it in any way they want, but I had a professor who had us do this for readings, uh, and I read the most in that class because it was fun. I was like, oh, I'll draw the concepts. But if you assign this and you give them these key things you want them to address, and then the subcategories, and then they come up with this visual, you can see, oh, you know what? They're connecting this part of the African history with the other part, and that's wrong. So it gives you can see readily that
Mm.
there needs to be some clarification. Um, and it's fun, you might get all kinds of different examples, but it's got a little bit of quirky engagement, but there's a lot of value in that. So that's something that you could consider.
Mm.
having them do.
So,
Or
a
you could,
question about the concept map. How
yep.
do you develop this? Can you do this like on Blackboard, or it has to be done manually?
You know what? I will look. There's tools. What I'm going to do is look for some tools,
Okay.
and then because there's some templates and stuff. Um, I'll find some, and when I send you all the PowerPoint, I'll send some links to some concept maps. And I want to check. We have Adobe Creative Campus now, which is a really awesome tool for all of us. And all of us and students have this. So it's good if they can all have the same tool too. So I'm going to look to see if there's an option for that in there.
Okay.
Um, and then I will send that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, you're welcome. And see, when they're creating this, they're engaged, they're thinking about it, they're manipulating, they're seeing this visual emerge. They're thinking about it, they're using their hands. So it's a deeper level of engagement. More of their senses are involved. They have to think about how are these things connected. So it has more impact. Um, it looks just like a simple um, graphic, but it's a really powerful tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay. And then you might also have them do a hierarchical structure. And I'll see if one of those is in Adobe Express is what I'm thinking, but I'll see and then send you a link for those things. And you might have them also. In one of my classes, I would pull up a live feed from somewhere in the world. Depending upon the time of day, I might pull up Times Square in New York, and there's a live feed, and you can see what is happening at Times Square. And there's other places in the world you can do this too. And you could have them look for whatever you're trying to teach them, have them look for those key um, aspects of maybe you're looking at how people engage with each other, or you're looking at traffic patterns, or you're looking at electronic communication or something. Have your focus points. And what I do is I have a simple template that has, let's say, 5 different key themes I want them to look at. I want them to look at the social interactions. I want them to look at um, the electronic, or maybe I'll just say like communication. And then they'll come up with, okay, there's communication between the people, there's communication in the billboards, the displays. So have a few key categories and then have them identify examples, and you kind of have it chunked up because you're trying to get them to focus on maybe the engagement, maybe the traffic, maybe the busyness, whatever that is, maybe the economy. What does that live feed, this is just a picture, but tell you about the economy at that time? And then they have to go, well, let's see. Um,
Okay.
maybe it's, okay. So that's another example that you could do.
Okay.
Um, you can have group projects. We all do those, and you get the diverse experiences going on there. Um, and so you're taking them from that very initial learning the information and then applying it in the field. And we're trying to help them along that process. And so we want to create an environment where they feel comfortable taking that big leap into the unknown, and they experience learning as fun and understand that there's challenges involved. And what we do is we help them roll with that. Um, and one of the things that's really important is to normalize not knowing and normalize them asking questions and being confused, because otherwise they won't ask questions. So part of that is building a comfortable, safe environment too. So just in closing, how do you think that, just pondering the way knowledge is organized, how you might use that as an instructor, um, or how it might benefit your students.
Well, for me as an instructor, I think this is like relearning because I always, um, I have the content
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, but I think this has really empowered me with ways of strategies that I can be more effective in and intentional, just going beyond the content delivery, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yep.
this is also really inspired me a lot of kind of ideas in terms of how to get student engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging activity is one that I really I would like to kind of develop, enhance in the next couple of years to come. So, and especially
Mm-hmm.
as Chat GPT,
Yep.
generative AI become rampant, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that students are kind of engaged and not just like you send them an assignment and then they come back and they spit it back to you, right?
Yep.
So co-creation kind of method. That's one of the ideas that I really like here. The live feed in group project, I think that will really work very well with one of my courses. So yeah, I'm delighted to learn about all this.
Okay, awesome. And I'm happy to send, if you have questions about other stuff, we have lots of resources. So you can email me and I can send you other ones too, because we have lots of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And Mazuma, what do you think?
Um, I like the same what Ismail says. Most of the part is similar because for me it's all the new thing I learned today because there is so many things to learn. That's the first thing I uh, got from today's workshop and about the knowledge organization. So I learned a lot from you too. So I'm going to email you too to learn more about whenever I'm because I'm going to create my next year syllabus for my students next semester. So on that time, whenever I will organize my assignment, maybe if I need any help, I'm going to email you. So that's the thing I want to share with you also.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, because as Ismail also mentioned about like because this is the new challenge for nowadays about like ChatGPT, generative AI. Most of the
Yes.
students like whenever we give them any kind of assignment, they like tend to do like as early as possible, like the way they just give it to them. But we can also like teach them how they can use if they want to
Yes.
use it, how they can use it like effectively, not like the copy
Yes.
paste.
Yes, exactly. And we know it's here and exactly. So you can have them, and we have some various workshops on AI. There's been a number of different initiatives on that. And so it's a tool. Say, okay, maybe run this through AI, give them a specific assignment, and then take it deeper. Okay, how could they improve it? Improve it? How could they um, dig deeper into, ask questions that require deeper levels of and unique ways to think about things that aren't going to just be able to be quickly Google or receive from ChatGPT or the various tools that we have. Um, because we need them to understand how to use the tools as well. So yeah, that's awesome. So I would like to thank you both very much for your engagement and for your commitment to our students. And I will send the PowerPoint and the some tools for concept maps, and you can email me if you want other resources because we have plenty of them. Um, Thank you all so much, and I
Thank
hope that
you
you have
so much, Yvonne. We appreciate this opportunity.
thank you, Ishmael, and thank you, Masuma. Have a great summer, okay?
You too.
Likewise. Bye bye. Bye
Bye.
bye.